Good evening, everyone. I have 6:30, so I'll call the meeting to order. First order of business is a presentation from PEC on the water and sewer system study.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. I was last here in front of you. I'm Sarah Unruh with PEC, by the way. I was last here in front of you back in April when we were presenting and talking about the contract for this study. And so we're here tonight to give you an update on where we're at, kind of talk through where we're coming to the end, close to the end anyway, of our phase 1 work, and kind of give a quick reminder of what our next phases are. Originally, we talked about kind of 4 phases of work to get through this process. So tonight we're going to talk to you about where we're at with phase 1. So feel free to stop me if you have any questions as we go through. I do have 2 other folks with me this evening. So I have Trevor Kaufman, who has been working on your sewer and water master plans. And so we talk about some of that work in here. And so he's here to answer any specific questions that you might have about that work. And then Nicole Franken has been doing actually this water and wastewater options assessment related more specifically to the treatment side of things and supply side. So again, any specific questions that I don't want to fumble my way through and would rather have them answer, they're here to help with that. So, all right. There we go. Okay. So as a quick reminder, the purpose of our phase 1 study was basically to take a look at all of the existing information that we have and to establish kind of what we thought anticipated water and wastewater demands were going to be for, number 1, Bel Aire's growth areas, which is where the master plan and that work comes into play. And then looking obviously specifically in this case at development related to the CHIPS funding or the Integra site. We wanted to identify and evaluate potential water supply and wastewater treatment options. The big thing to come out of this first phase in phase 1 is to say, what do we really have? What are all the options out there? And then narrow those down to what really are the feasible options, right? So we wanted to take a look at everything that was there and kind of weed out the stuff that didn't really make sense for one reason or another. So that's where we're at for phase 1. Oops. Okay. So the scope specifically for the options assessment, again, we had 4 phases total. This is the first phase, was to take a look at the current contracts that you have in place for both water and wastewater service. So there are contracts with CCUA, with Wichita, taking a look at those and seeing what the terms and conditions and things were for that. We also wanted to look at the feasibility of water supply and wastewater treatment options and look at those options also for future connections. So obviously building new treatment plants for everything is an option, but we wanted to see what about future connections to your existing systems that you have. So we looked at that as well. And then to kind of just provide a reminder of what the water and sewer master plans are all about, since again, we are kind of marrying up the 2 of these in this presentation, and a lot of some of the work overlaps. So first of all, the master plan intent is to really look at what's necessary within the systems themselves. So while the study that we're working on, that Nicole's been working on, is looking kind of the water supply side and specifically looking at the treatment side, the master plan is looking for inside those water and sewer systems themselves as to what improvements are needed. The first step in any sort of master planning process is to identify the growth areas and develop water and sewer projections based on, in this case, a 20-year planning period. So looking at what development you anticipate within the community for both water and sewer demands. And in this case, we specifically were excluding the Integra suppliers as far as the master plan itself was concerned. And then what we do is we develop actual models, computerized models for each of those systems. So we modeled the existing water system and the existing sewer system. And then we go through and evaluate those water models or those water and sewer models under current conditions. So to identify any sort of current issues or deficiencies in the system that would need to be addressed to fully take care of your existing demands. And then we look at those over those periods that we look at into the future. Typically look at those in kind of 5 or 10 year increments to see what is necessary to address those future demands as well. And then basically develop construction estimates to go with each of those demands or each of those projects that are recommended. Okay. So this first table summarizes the water demand projections, and there's a lot going on. There are a lot of numbers, there are ranges. So I'm going to go through and explain what all information is on this table. So the first thing I want to talk about are the different scenarios there on the left. Okay. So scenario 1 is basically what you guys are anticipating your internal development just within Bel Aire in the next couple of years. So things that are already on the books for development that's going to occur, and we know those demands are going to be in the system in the next couple of years. So that's Bel Aire only. Scenario 2 is the development that Bel Aire is anticipating in that next 5-year time frame, that 26 to 31 time frame, plus phase 1 of Integra. Okay. And then scenario 3 is, again, the development that Bel Aire is anticipating in that 5-year time frame, plus, or I guess the longer, 32 to 43, that time frame, plus Integra phase 2. Okay. So that's what the scenarios are themselves. Then we get into the actual demand numbers. So what I want to explain first is the range. So you'll see, scenario 1 is just Bel Aire. So those are the numbers that we've come up with in the master plan projections for just what we think Bel Aire is going to need in the next 2 years. When we get down into scenarios 2 and 3, you'll notice those ranges. So the low end of that, the high end of that range, we'll talk about that. The high end of the range includes the 5 suppliers. Okay, so the low end of the range is Bel Aire's demand plus phase 1 of Integra itself. Then if we add the 5 potential suppliers on there, that gets us to the high end of those ranges. Okay. In our initial discussions with, at the time, GLMV, when they started this process, we were told an estimated demand of 1.2 million gallons per day for Integra, and to assume that each of the suppliers would have that same demand. So those numbers are all based on that assumption, okay, for those high end of the ranges. So one thing to point out, I guess, so scenario 2 would be Integra phase 1 and 5 suppliers at the high end. On scenario 3, we assume that when Integra expands, those suppliers are going to have to expand as well. So that's why the ranges go up in both cases. So, okay. One thing to note is that when we get into talking about the options from the master plan, those only include Bel Aire and Integra. We did not account for suppliers in there. And the reason is we put these into these projections because we need to look at those. However, subsequent conversations have kind of led us to believe that those demands are potentially quite a bit lower than this, just because of the type of suppliers, but we don't have good hard information on that yet. So we want to present the wide range of it, but knowing that the improvements we're going to talk about later from the master plan don't necessarily include those suppliers. Okay. So what we're looking at, we've got 3 columns. One is the average day demand, which is just kind of your average day. Basically, when you take your water demand spread out over the whole year, what is that average? Then we get into a max day. So obviously during the year, you're going to have some sort of max day demand. Today would be a good potential day for that, as hot as it's been. So some sort of max day that you're going to have during the year. And then the peak hour demand. And that peak hour demand is reflective of that time, kind of first thing in the morning, first thing in the evening kind of time frame when people are using a lot of water to get ready in the morning and a lot of water when they first come home. So there's a peak hour demand sometime during the day. The curve of the day kind of does this thing. It's not really straight all the time. And we hit that peak hour and we want to account for that. So that's what those different demands are. So if you look at all these numbers, they're quite large. So we are talking about quite a bit of water that is going to be needed when we look at these different scenarios for obviously Bel Aire's expansion, but then also Integra and then these potential suppliers. Okay. So then we're going to look at the wastewater side. All the same information applies here. And so basically we're looking at, roughly right now in the next few years for Bel Aire itself, around that 1.18 million gallons per day of wastewater flow for just Bel Aire and development. And then we get into, you can see if we look the highest, we're looking around almost 11 if we were to account for Bel Aire, Integra, and all those suppliers in that kind of far out phase. Okay. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is just kind of a quick summary of your existing agreements. So the first is the water supply agreements. I'm sure you guys probably know most of this already, but we'll go through it really quickly. So the existing agreement with CCUA was established in 2002. There's a little over $6 million remaining on the debt obligations on the water treatment plant. You're entitled to 50% of the water treatment plant capacity, which in this case is 1.75 million gallons per day. There is currently no expiration date set in that agreement. And then, of course, when that agreement was made, the water rights that Bel Aire and Park City had transferred to CCUA. So the city doesn't have any current water rights associated with that. The agreement that you have with Wichita was established in 2007, and it technically has a 20-year term. So 2027 is the end of that agreement currently. And right now, in that existing schedule, the city was set to receive just a little over 1 million gallons per day in 2028 per the original schedule that was included with that contract. So basically what we can see from this with the existing agreements is that you could supply scenario 2. So a reminder that scenario 2 is Bel Aire's development plus Integra phase 1. No suppliers, but you could do that with the current contracts in place. Okay. All right. Okay. So then on the wastewater side, same thing. We've got an agreement with CCUA, same year, a little over $8 million remaining on that debt obligation. Through that contract, you guys have a little bit less than half of the capacity, so 1.01 million gallons per day of that existing capacity. Again, no expiration date on the agreement. And then obviously there's a consent order issue and response that's going on. So that's another issue with the CCUA wastewater plant. In 2018, the Wichita agreement came online. There's no expiration date on this agreement. There's no contractual flow limitations necessarily. Again, this is an overflow connection that you have that is not used on a regular basis, but it is a connection that exists with the Wichita system right now. So we estimate, based on the data that we had available, a little over like 0.42 million gallons per day or so is the average flow that has been sent through that connection, and about 1.25 of peak flow capacity for Bel Aire. So the summary of the existing service agreements is basically you could just cover scenario 1 with your current contracts, which is just your development in the next couple of years. Okay, so now we're going to get into the options that we looked at for both water and wastewater. So first we're going to talk about water supply options. And one option obviously is the Wichita distribution system. You have connections there already, and there's the potential to supply additional water. A couple things that we need to consider in that, though, are one, water rights restrictions and a saltwater plume. Obviously, that's always out there. And when we talk about water right restrictions, that's basically we're talking about drought conditions. You know, obviously, if Wichita is not able to get all the water that they need out of their sources, then the wholesale customers start, will get their water reduced off of that. So that's just when we talk about water right restrictions, it's referring to the drought situations. So the existing north pressure zone, City of Wichita, which is basically your connection out 53rd and Rock, between Rock and Webb, that connection up there, could supply a maximum of about 3.2 million gallons per day. And we've had conversations with the City of Wichita for them to run their water model to confirm for us, approximately what we think we could get out of each of these situations. So about 3.2 million gallons per day. And then the existing connection at 37th, like Woodlawn Railroad area, could supply a maximum of about 2 to 3.5 million gallons per day. Now, of course, Wichita is building a new water treatment facility. And so we looked into that as an option as well. Obviously, the same issues with potential drought conditions would affect that connection as well. But that would require a pump station at the Northwest Water Treatment Facility and a new supply line of approximately 36 inches or maybe a little larger all the way to Bel Aire. Okay. They could potentially supply all the water that we've looked at in our estimates and our projections, but we still need to confirm how much they're actually able to supply off of that facility. So we don't know the exact number on that one yet. But the other thing is that connection could potentially benefit other nearby communities as well, since we've got a line all the way up to Bel Aire from the Northwest plant. Okay. We also looked at El Dorado as another option as well. We talked to them. This option would require, again, a pump station and a pipeline from the El Dorado water treatment plant to Bel Aire. Their facility could supply approximately 3 million gallons per day without any upgrades to their system. But then they could get 6 million gallons a day would be the maximum we could get, but that would require upgrades to their plant. In initial conversations with El Dorado, they said that they would pay for the water treatment plant upgrades, but Bel Aire would be responsible to cover the pump station and pipeline costs, and obviously any ongoing maintenance that goes along with any of those. We also looked at the CCUA water treatment plant, since you have that as a supply currently. So you can use, as we talked before, 1.7 million gallons per day of the current capacity of that plant. Two things to consider with that is one, CCUA only has 3.1 million gallons of water rights right now. I know they're in talks to look at recovering some from industrial conversion and some other things that, I know are being worked through now. So there's the potential that there are more water rights there. But at the current time, they only have the 3.1 million gallons per day that we can account for. And brand new water rights would be a significant investment for them to look into. So this conversion could potentially give additional supply there.
So
Yes.
just curious, how do they how do you say we have a 3.5 million gallon water per day current capacity when the water rights are only 3.1?
Do you want to answer that, Nicole?
Yeah, they're just average production is not able to be met with the current water rights.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why the facility was constructed for 3.5 if they didn't have quite that much in water rights.
Okay, so you're just saying the pumping capacity of the system is 3.5,
Correct.
but the water rights is only 3.1.
Correct.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right,
Yes,
that
that's
makes
the
sense.
clarification. So
All
the
right,
plant
thank you.
itself could process that much. They just don't have that much legally to pump.
Right.
And water rights are not on a per day basis, right?
So it's an annual total.
So you might have a day where you
Correct.
use more of a day than you use
Yeah.
less.
That is correct. Yes.
And does that include the additional water capacity from the EPA site?
No, that is not. That's still kind of all in talks. So that 3.1 MGD of water rights is what they legally have right now to their name. So those would be the rights that basically were transferred to the CCUA when it was formed. So that's what they have right now. So again, there could be potential water rights that come out of all those discussions, but we didn't account for any of that at this point, obviously, because we just don't know. But that could be a factor later on. And then we looked at, of course, just a new water treatment plan for the city of Bel Aire. The issue with that, of course, is just that you would have to obtain your own water rights for all of that, and that would be a pretty significant investment to do that. So we looked at that. And the last one on here is beneficial reuse. Obviously, anything that of the demands for Integra or their suppliers that could be met with reuse water, meaning treated wastewater that comes off of the wastewater plant, anything that could be met for that then reduces the potable water requirement. So that's something that as we move forward and get deeper into things, and after determines if Integra is 100% here, we can start talking about that in more depth. But that is definitely something we would want to look at to reduce the overall potable water needs. If there's things that can be done with reuse water. Okay. So wastewater treatment options, we looked at Wichita Sewer connection. So we looked at the potential for a new connection, and this would be at approximately 45th and Rock, where would be that new connection would be. And that new connection can accept about 1.92 MGD as a peak flow from the city of Bel Aire. And then we looked at the existing connection, so we could accept a peak flow in the existing connection that you have at roughly 37th and Oliver. That existing overflow connection could take about 1.25 million gallons per day. So we would need to verify all these flows, obviously, especially the one with the existing connection. We've got, data that we're working off of. We'd want to verify all of that to make sure, but based on the data that we have, these are the numbers that we could work with. At the CCUA wastewater treatment plant, obviously, you've got the consent order issues going on that need to be resolved. But based strictly on capacity, you can use 1.01 MGD of the existing capacity. The other thing with that is that wastewater treatment plant could be expanded, but we have an estimate from talking with Burns & McDonnell and their evaluation of the plant that it could only be expanded to about 4.5 million gallons per day because of the restrictions of the site. Obviously, there's only so much space available to put additional treatment capacity and basins in there, so we estimate about 4.5 million gallons that it could be expanded. So really, you're going from 2.16 to 4.5. So not a lot of capacity, but you could, almost double it. And then we looked, of course, at a new wastewater treatment plant that the city of Bel Aire would construct and operate. That could handle, obviously, all of the wastewater if needed and could be phased in, phased improvements in as development occurs within that Integra development and within the city. And it is a potential project that could qualify for some regionalization grant money from the state if there's other entities that you could pull into that. Okay. So now we're going to talk about preliminary improvements that have come out of the master plan. Okay. So as a reminder, this is with Bel Aire and Integra only, no suppliers. Okay. So first of all, piping improvements for the water system. We have, I think it's the next slide too. So, okay, I'm going to flip back and forth just a little bit. So the first one would be 16-inch water lines to supply the growth areas. So you can see kind of all those dashed lines. Okay, so these are the looping 16-inch lines that would be installed to be able to supply those demands throughout the system.
We
Okay.
don't have those today.
No, those dashed lines are not in the system currently. Correct. We also recommended or looked at an option for preliminary improvement of a new supply connection with the city of Wichita that we talked about, which was approximately 3.2 million gallons per day of a connection. That would require, an additional connection, that's right. So that additional connection would be at 53rd and Rock. So let's see if that's, yeah, okay. Is there a laser thing on this thing? The green button? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so here, if you can see, I know it's really kind of tiny, but here is the new City of Wichita connection right here that we're talking about. So everybody can kind of see where that's located. Okay. And then the other thing that we would look here is storage improvements. Now, and that's at 2 million gallons. I know it seems kind of strange to put a proposed tank basically right next to the City of Wichita's tank. However, that tank would be required for the City of Wichita. They would have to operate that tank to serve their customers in order to send the 3.2 million gallons a day to you guys. So City of Bel Aire would need a separate tank of their own to make that system work. Does that make sense? No?
Not really.
Okay. Do you want to explain it, Trevor, or do you want?
Well, so the
I can
3.2
explain it.
million gallon assumption, I mean, the goal of City of Wichita is to get that tank back online. It's been offline and they want to get it back online for their operation. So
Could you speak in the microphone, please?
3.2 then is based off of, that was them looking at their model with that tower back in service. So that was the intent, and that's where that 3.2 came from. So obviously they're using that storage to, backfeed their system to the south for fire flows and peak demands as well. So I know there was discussion, and we even had with city staff of, basically could we transfer that to Bel Aire system? And maybe that's still a possibility, but based on our discussions with Wichita, their intent is to get it in service and utilize it for their needs.
They have customers near the tower.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the north end of what they call their northeast zone. And there's a loop of water lines there that feed south. So this tower would serve to kind of backfeed that entire pressure zone for them, kind of from Webb and 21st kind of to the northeast. Yeah. That makes sense? Yeah.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay. So now on the sanitary sewer. And again, these are recommendations that are coming out of the work we're doing with the master plan. So the first one is CCUA, which would be new gravity lines and lift stations to take all that flow to CCUA. What that would require is a new lift station near that area, roughly near 53rd and Webb, and then upgrades required at the existing lift station at 53rd and Woodlawn, and then obviously an increase of capacity at the CCUA wastewater plant to make all of that work. So there's quite a bit. I know it's a small statement, but there's a lot involved in that statement as far as improvements are concerned. Option 2 would be Bel Aire constructing a wastewater treatment plant. So that would require obviously new gravity lines to take flows from the growth areas to the new wastewater plant. And then CCUA and Wichita overflow connections, you'd maintain those existing connections as well. And then the last option we looked at was a new connection to the City of Wichita. So there would be a new connection to the 24-inch line to handle the Integra flows. And then CCUA and Wichita overflow connection would be maintained, and we'd be sending all of the additional flow as far as Bel Aire growth is concerned to CCUA. So basically that new connection to the 24-inch with the City of Wichita would just be the Integra flows. And then all of the Bel Aire development would go to the CCUA plant. Okay. So I know these maps are a little small, but is there anything specific you want to point out on these, Trevor, other than just kind of where those connections are? Let me see. I think it's on the next one. One more. There we go. You want to point them out or you want me to? Which one? You got to point it back there. There you go.
Okay, so option one was essentially continuing what you guys do today, which is to take everything to CCUA. Obviously, Sarah just talked about the restrictions with CCUA's ability to do that. So this is under the assumption that CCUA could handle all that flow. But in a somewhat simplistic way, we have a new proposed lift station near Integra, and all of the development kind of on the east side would all be routed to that lift station. And then that lift station, in some combination, would be routed through the existing lift station near 53rd, and then ultimately through your guys' existing force main going to CCUA. So you'll see different improvements around, which just kind of represent different main pipes that would have to be installed, essentially to collect all of these growth areas. Option two then is the new treatment plant. It's obviously just a conceptual location, but in general, things are trying to flow this direction. So in this, concept, this would represent the new treatment plant, and then we're just having to put in the new gravity mains to take all the flow from the growth areas to the new treatment plant. And then, as Sarah noted, this is just picking up the east side in this concept, all the proposed growth. The existing system and how it maintains flow to CCUA would be maintained. And then option three is very similar to option one. The difference being that a new 24-inch line is being installed down to Wichita, a new lift station and force mains being connected to the 24-inch line to take Integra's flows directly to the new connection to Wichita. And then all of the other growth would still be taken to CCUA. One thing to note about these, this will be a very fluid solution here, depending on how all the other decisions are made. So I don't really expect that the final decision will actually look like one of these three. It'll be kind of a blend or combination of them. And I haven't actually had a chance to talk to Ann and Ty about this, but just so you know where we are progress-wise in the master plans, we have submitted the preliminary water report with city staff. So we're going to need to meet with them, kind of go over comments, see if there's any changes. And then we're wrapping up the sewer master plan right now. We will do the same. And then if you guys want, we may do a separate presentation on the master plan where we will go through this in much more detail. So
Does the line to CCUA have enough capacity to handle any growth at all, or how much growth could it handle?
So when we looked at the size of the force main, we looked at it based on allowable velocities that the state allows you to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're maxing it out, which isn't necessarily ideal, but to see what it does. And it's going to be close. And we look at it in two ways. We look at it kind of the average flows Sarah's talking about, but we also look at the peak. Based on the numbers we have, if you look at it from average flows, it has no issue. If you look at it from peaks, it's right there. So that will be a little bit of a concern. I mean, we're showing that it's borderline of scenario 3.
And what's the assumptions behind that being peak and average? Is that just Integra and the existing city, or is it?
So
Integra
in the
and
master
suppliers, or
plan,
what?
it's the existing Bel Aire plus all of your development growth, so all those areas plus Integra.
What about Integra suppliers?
No suppliers in that one.
Just
Yeah.
Integra. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the reason the master plan, and Sarah alluded to that, I mean, part of it is we need a starting point. If a supplier comes in, it'll greatly change our improvement
And
recommendations.
Just so we know what that data point is, what is that average flow in there? in that pipe if you go that max capacity that you just talked about?
Going to CCUA.
Yeah, what is that?
Nicole, do you remember that?
2 million gallons a day?
No, it's more than that.
Okay.
Well, the
That
max
sounds a little
plant
too
capacity is
high. Go back to the
4.5.
Right. So
Yeah.
the simple question is we're probably going to max the plant out before, it sounds like, before the force main.
Currently, the plant will get maxed out before
Okay.
the force main.
That's a
Yes.
simple
That is
answer.
true.
That is true. Yes,
But you
Yeah.
don't know what that main would be like.
I do.
Yeah.
I just
Oh, okay.
I got to find the number if we have it with us. So it should be very similar to, I think on average we had it at, it's in our report. I think it was around 6 million gallons on average.
Okay.
And then the 10 feet per second pushes you up like around 10. And that's where our peak of 11 slightly higher. So that's where we'll
Okay.
have to kind of work through that.
Okay.
But if the max of the plant can only ever be expanded to 4.5 because of the footprint, then
You'll never get there. Right.
Yes.
we'll max out that site long before the line. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I believe even the 4.5 would be the total shared with Park City. So
Yeah.
you only
so
have
you
half
only
of
get
that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we kind of need to know where that was. So we
Yeah.
know what our options are there. Okay. Thank you.
I got you out of order.
Oh, you're
now.
fine. I can get back to this.
Okay.
Okay. You just like clicking the button. There you go. All right. Okay. So now we want to look at each of the water supply options that we talked about and each of the wastewater options that we talked about and just kind of see how those match up with construction timelines that we're talking about as far as the intended development of Integra Phase 1 and Phase 2, and then also the actual demand requirements. So again, we note that the existing systems can handle Bel Aire's projected development for the next 2 years. So we're only looking at scenarios 2 and 3 with the Integra development added in. Okay. Okay. So these responses, as far as yeses and nos, are based on the high end of those ranges that we provided. So these yeses and nos would include Integra and their 5 suppliers. Okay. So no, that's a little bit different than what we were just talking about with the master plan discussion. But these yeses and nos are applied to that high end range. Okay. So the first one we talked about was on water would be the Wichita distribution system connection. So we can meet the construction requirements, when we think Integra and those suppliers would be online approximately, but we can't get the full demand of the 8.6 million gallons per day on that high end of the range with either of those. Okay. So we couldn't meet those scenarios on the high end of the range. Again, remember, these are based on that high end. And as we dial in more about what those suppliers are going to look like, and even Integra's demand itself would look like, what reuse options we have to cut down that demand, these could change. But based on the high end range, we would not be able to meet the demand requirements with the Wichita distribution connection. The next one is the Northwest Water Plant connection. So we couldn't meet scenario 2 from a construction time frame just because of the amount of time obviously it takes to design all of that, get it in the ground, get all the easements that are necessary from the Northwest Water Treatment Plant to Bel Aire. So we couldn't quite meet scenario 2. We could, however, meet scenario 3, and we could potentially meet all the demand requirements. Again, that depends on what the city's final answer would be on what they could supply out of that plant. The next one on the list is the El Dorado Water Plant connection. Again, just with the same kind of considerations we talked about for the line from the Wichita Northwest Water Plant, time constraints would be an issue to meet scenario 2, but we could meet scenario 3. However, on the high end of those demands, we would not be able to meet the demand scenarios required for either scenario 2 or scenario 3 because they have a restriction of what their plant could be expanded to. The CCUA water plant, obviously there's no construction issues with that because it's already in place. However, we wouldn't be able to meet the demand requirements with that because of the fact of the existing capacity that you're allowed at the water treatment plant. Now, of course, additional water rates may change some of that, but at this point in time, they would not be able to meet that. And then reuse, obviously, we don't know anything about yet, so it's on the list, but we can't really quantify that one yet. Okay. And then on the wastewater side, we'll go through kind of the same exercise. So the existing Wichita sewer connection, which is that overflow connection, could help us in meeting scenario 2 and 3 as far as construction requirements, because obviously it's already there. However, the flow requirements it wouldn't be able to meet. As we had discussed, it's got limitations on the current capacity of those lines. The new connection that we talked about to the existing 24-inch sewer, obviously limited, it's a very short line, and so it would not require much on the construction time frame. So we would be able to meet those construction time frames. We could meet scenario 2 demands with that connection, but we would not be able to meet scenario 3. The CCUA wastewater treatment plant. So what we're assuming here is that that treatment plant is expanded to its full capacity, potential capacity of 4.5. So just keep that in mind. Construction time frame would be an issue with scenario 2, obviously not with scenario 3. It's farther out. However, it wouldn't provide enough, as we just discussed, it wouldn't provide enough capacity because you would have half of that, not the full 4.5. So we would not be able to meet the full demands for either scenario 2 or scenario 3. And then the last option with Bel Aire constructing its own wastewater plant, obviously with the time frame required for design and construction of that, we wouldn't be able to meet scenario 2, but we could meet scenario 3. And obviously that facility would be designed to handle whatever demands we were projecting, so it could meet the flow requirements for either scenario 2 or 3.
Sorry, just for clarification, on the sewer, it was the same as the water. This included Integra and all 5 suppliers.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So this is the high end of those tables we looked at with those ranges. This is based on those high ends. Correct. Yeah. So the hope is that we can get more detailed information on those demand requirements for both water and sewer, see what we can do on the reuse side to reduce those water demands, and then refine these down better to see, what the really good option, hopefully rises to the top. Okay, so now that I've thrown a whole bunch of numbers and stuff at you, we'll kind of talk about what our next step would be. So as I mentioned before, we talked about kind of 4-phased approach to this work. So we'll be wrapping up phase 1 here pretty soon. We're hoping to get some additional information to be able to hone this in a little bit more, but basically we're complete with phase 1, where we're just kind of looking at the options and deciding what really is feasible. And then phase 2, once we come out of this with, okay, these are the ones we want to move forward with to dive deeper into, we'll move into phase 2. And that's where we will go for just looking at those preferred options for water and sewer. And we'll establish the specific infrastructure requirements, what those look like. We will estimate those capital construction costs and then annual operating costs for those options as well. We'll determine what the permitting requirements are going to be. Obviously, permitting for a new wastewater plant is very different from a connection to Wichita. So we'll look at what those permitting requirements are, and then we're going to do the rate study as well. I know that's an important part of determining, how these options are going to affect your residents and your customers. So once we hone in on those options, then we'll be looking at that piece at that point in time. Okay. And then phase 3 would be where we would be looking at an actual siting study. So assuming we move forward with any sort of new facilities where we would be needing to look at a site. So Trevor picked out a block on the map, but we'll actually go and determine what a good site would be for that facility. So that would be what we would do in phase 3, and then doing a conceptual design for a wastewater treatment plant. If we move forward with a wastewater treatment plant, that's what will be in phase 3. And then phase 4 was where we would put together the actual preliminary engineering report that's required for KDHE, and then the funding mechanisms that you'll be looking at. And then, of course, the last step in any of this process, once a determination is made as to how we want to move forward, would be making any necessary modifications to existing contracts to be in line with what options we're going forward with. And that's all I have. So what other questions do you have? You guys have been really engaged in asking great questions. So what else is on your mind?
On the reuse side, have you looked at other sources other than Integra for reuse, like Catholic Care Campus? I don't know. There might be others. I just don't know.
Yeah, we have not specifically looked into that. But if we look at a reuse option, we would certainly want to look at, are there other places that it could be reused? I know right now it's the golf course. Obviously, they take the water and use it for irrigation. That's always an option. Most likely it's going to be either other irrigation sources or potentially, like Integra, some sort of industrial process where they would take that wastewater and then treat it however they need it to use it into their existing processes, like cooling towers and such. So most of the time it's going to be some sort of irrigation or industrial type use or supply. but we have not dug into that specifically of others. We just know that as we move forward, we want to definitely look into that an option specifically with Integra because of how high their demand is, them and their suppliers as well. So we want to make sure that that's part of what we're looking at.
I just know that, like I mentioned, the Catholic campus there, I don't know how many acres it is. It's probably 160 or more acres.
So in
And it's
irrigation,
irrigated. So
Mhm.
it's,
that is certainly an option. I know that and it's a golf course, but in Dodge City several years ago, we did a project where they now take reuse water instead of using a well to fill their pond for the exact same reason. So yeah, those are certainly options, those irrigation options. It comes with some, restrictions of when you can water and you can't spray people and blah, blah. But it's certainly a thing that can be used on other locations. So.
I just had a side question. What exactly is the saltwater plume referenced in an earlier slide?
Do you want to talk about that, Nicole?
Sure. It's quite a ways out. There was up northwest of Wichita. I think it was Benton, maybe. There was an oil field that had some saltwater plume that's migrating slowly towards Wichita's well fields, and so that's part of the ASR project is trying to slow that down. But I think it was last time I heard 10 to 20 years at the earliest potentially going to impact them. So I know that's something that Wichita's tracking pretty closely, but that's one thing that will eventually impact their water supply.
Is that related to the EPA remediation site that they're putting in for CCUA? It's for some sort of
No.
plume.
That one's separate. I think that had to do with some industry.
it was
I
an
don't
industry
remember.
plume. Yeah. This
Yeah.
plume's been there for a long time, but yeah. But that was, I heard numbers of 1 million gallons a day that they're going to be pumping out of there.
Yeah, so I know that Burns and Mac had some preliminary conversations with the project manager for that, and it sounded like it was going to be, 10, 20 years potentially pumping, so it's not a long-term solution.
Right.
And I don't think that they'd hammered out water rights going through the state, making sure that pumping that much won't negatively impact other people, is my understanding. So there's still some stuff that's unknown about that.
Okay.
That we'll have to keep tabs on, but it is a potential option for short term, I guess, getting by. So
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I
Well, thank
appreciate
you.
it. And if anybody has any questions later on that you think of that pop into your brain, please let Tyrian know and we'll get back to you on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
you.
it.
Well, good evening, everybody. Ken Lee with Garver. I'm going to be here tonight talking about the 53rd Street North Oliver to Woodlawn project update, kind of let you guys know where everything's at on it, what we're doing, what we've done, where things are going. Ann's handing out a printout. The slides may or may not be easy to read. These aren't going to be great either, but I figured I'd give you something to scribble on if nothing else. So to start with, just kind of where the project is at right now. The project kind of went on hold there for a while because we were waiting for funding on the project, and the city had applied for KDOT cost share funding last year and was not selected for that. And so the city at the time didn't have funds to continue it. So we kind of put the project on hiatus for a little bit. The city went after cost share funding again and unfortunately wasn't selected. And I know you've been having conversations now about moving ahead with construction, but we had turned in 100% not for construction plans about 2 months ago now to Ann. And with some changes that have been going on as far as conversations with some other grant funding, it's still in the review process. So we haven't made any changes on it, but Ann has a current set with where things are if the other sidewalk grant funding doesn't come through. So Utility coordination is ongoing. We've been working with utilities that do have conflicts and talking to them about clear dates and those kind of things. As I mentioned, there's some grant funding that might lead to a 10-foot multi-use path instead of the 6-foot path.
Yeah, that was approved by WAMPO yesterday.
Was it approved? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Now it has to go through the TIP yet, but
Okay.
but it's already.
Well, good. So we're one step further than I knew.
It's
So good.
292,000 was approved.
Okay. So how much was it for then?
292,000.
Good. That'll cover a significant amount of
80%.
costs. So yeah.
Yeah.
So we looks like we will be modifying the plans for the 10-foot sidewalk. We started on that a little bit. We've done some preliminary layouts for Ann to review. The 10-foot sidewalk creates some challenges, and I'll kind of talk about that in a minute. The city is working on some right-of-way acquisition. We've got 4 different right-of-way acquisition as far as for right-of-way, and then I think another 2 that are easements, drainage easements, that type of thing. Project cost, when we did our estimate, we updated our cost. Our construction cost right now is about 1.8 million. With all the other costs that go into the project total ends up closer to 2.5 million when you add in everything else. That does not include the sidewalk changes. The sidewalk changes will add that $300,000. That'll eat up most of those costs. We'll have to extend some pipes further to accommodate the sidewalk. We'll have to, there's just the additional cost of sidewalk. There's 40% more sidewalk than there was before, and some other changes. Plus, one of the requirements on this is we were just going to basically connect Oliver to Woodlawn. We'll have to extend it further. So these costs are prior to that, but we're looking at around $2.5 million for the project. Typical road section, I wanted to kind of just show you what we're proposing for the road. The road as it is today is 24 foot wide, but what that really means is it's only like 11 foot wide because it's really narrow, and of course it's in poor condition. The proposed section that we have is going to be a 15-foot asphalt lane for each side. So it'll be a 12-foot driving lane and a 3-foot shoulder. So in the event that we didn't really have enough room to go bigger than that, but what that'll do is if somebody does have an issue where they need to pull over, they'll at least have that extra 3 feet. They'll have 4 feet more than they have today if there is a need to pull over. So it'll be a safer environment for people passing. And essentially, with the total width of the road being 30 feet of pavement now, with the proposed section, you can get 3 cars through there if you needed to, where right now it's a stopping situation. There'll be enough room for cars to safely make its way by. We are shifting the center line of the road 4 feet south from the section line, and we're doing that. The main reason why we're doing that is to minimize work in the north ditch. There's a lot of right-of-way limitations on the north side, and we wanted to limit the number of negotiations the city had to get into on right-of-way, and it would have been a significantly higher amount of right-of-way we would have needed if we didn't offset it to the south. So we're essentially matching the south ditch for the most part through most of the project section.
Ken, quick question.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable that that is the right solution for a future road? Or are we going to be 10 years down the road when we need a 3-lane moving north anyway? Are you comfortable that shifting south is the right thing in the short term and in the near term?
If you go to a 3-lane curb and gutter section, you'll be fine. You can't go to a 3-lane mat section with the room we have available. So, but you could do a curb and gutter section with the room available. There's plenty of right of way on the south side.
Gotcha.
And the right of way take that I'll be talking about here in a little bit, that'll take you to 60 foot, the full length of the project on the south side. So you can do it quite a bit in that. And you've got 30 feet minimum on the north. So you have 90 foot of width. That'll be plenty for a 3-lane section if it's curb and gutter.
So this current proposal here is just a 2-lane road.
It's a 2-lane. That's correct. We'll have turn lanes at the intersections at each end of the project.
Okay.
So at Oliver and Woodlawn, we'll have turn lanes, but in the middle part of the section, we aren't going to have any turn lanes.
So none of the developments will have those turn lanes?
We talked to them and they were willing to let the city do it for them. But when we said, well, you'd have to pay if you wanted to do that, their enthusiasm level died. So we did talk to them about that, and there was a lack of enthusiasm if it was going to cost them money to do the improvement. So no, there won't be any turn lanes in the middle of it. So I'm going to just kind of walk through the project a little bit, talk about some critical areas that we looked at, things that we did, just so you understand. The red up here is the right-of-way take that in order to widen the road here, we did shift the road north because one of the big complaints that's been ongoing at 53rd and Woodlawn is when you pull up to the intersection, you got headlights in your eyes from the other side. So we're shifting this section to the north to eliminate that situation on this roadway.
To the north or south?
We're shifting this one to the north so that your westbound traffic will not be staring into the eyes of future leftbound traffic or straight traffic through. So we're shifting everything north there to eliminate the headlights in the eyes for people going westbound. So when you're here, you're going to be you'll be shifted a little bit north of the center line of this roadway to keep you from being, if we centered it, you'd end up being kind of splitting the difference a little bit on that traffic on the other side. So they're going to be lined up close enough. There's not going to be any problems for people going across. It'll be no different. It'll be similar to what you got going on at 45th or 53rd and Woodlawn, where there's a little transition, but it's not significant. And this will be similar to that. And that's also a wider roadway over there too, I think, where it's got wider shoulders and that type of thing too. So we're not expecting any problems with that.
Which intersection is this?
This is Oliver.
Oliver. Okay.
Yeah. So this is Oliver.
That's where I was mixed up. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
this shows this proposed 6-foot sidewalk that's going to change to 10-foot. This one is going to just tie into the edge of the shoulder at Oliver, and folks who want to go up Oliver will just have to go up the shoulder. At some point in time, we'd like to see a bike path or a multi-use path going up the east side of Oliver there as well, but that's a project for a different time. But this will provide the connectivity through there, and they'll be able to go from the pavement here, turn the corner, and come in. Because of the ditch there, we do have a small pipe proposed on that. There's an existing drainage area over here. We're going to continue carrying water across the road there. We're shifting it a little bit, but there's existing drainage that goes across and out.
So you said something about not connecting with Oliver, but isn't the plan on resurfacing Oliver to put bike paths on the striping of the Oliver?
Well, it'll be connected into the shoulder of Oliver. So if you do improvements that put a bike lane on Oliver, it would be easy to tie that in.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be tied in directly. Go ahead.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. The shoulder of all.
But I wanted to make sure that was going to, I just want to make sure that was going to tie into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So to be clear, we are connecting into the shoulder of Oliver there. So anybody who's riding up that shoulder will be able to just turn directly onto this path.
Okay.
This is another part of the project that's been kind of it's got a lot going on it. This is the Kilgore property that's east, about a quarter mile east. Significant right-of-way take here. This is the only right-of-way take on the south side of the road, though. You can see we have a box culvert here. There's a large drainage channel that runs out of the additions that are south of here and run up through here. So we're putting in an improved box that'll have better capacity. Because of the box, we did swing the sidewalk up closer to the edge of the road to reduce the cost of that box, because that box can easily cost $1,200, $1,500 a lineal foot. So you save money real fast by doing that. There is an existing fence out here that's in the future right-of-way, and part of the right-of-way agreement as far as that take will be working with the property owner to get that fence relocated to the property line. And of course, you see all the black X's here. Whenever you're doing a right-of-way take and on these kind of projects, it's always contentious when you're working with a landowner and you're taking away their tree. So these trees were planted by the landowner years ago, and many of them are on their property. So looking here, this is a couple of the subdivision connections east of the Kilgore property. These are into, this is, I think, Central Park. I lose track now. I think it's 6th edition. And this is Central Park, I think, 3rd. But these are a couple of the roadways, and any existing driveways that have been built, we'll have to remove those because they won't work with our new section. We'll have to tear those back, and we'll install new drainage flumes. And the one thing we're going to do as a general rule is specifically on public road crossings where we're crossing a public road, we're going to provide detectable warnings on the sidewalk just to make sure that we don't have any ADAG concerns on that. So we will be putting in detectable warnings on those. The next one. What's that? So the detectable warning is whenever you come up to a wheelchair ramp and you see there's like a 12-inch to 18-inch wide panel of little bumpy bricks. Those bumpy bricks are the detectable warnings. And, you know, I'm not sure that we'll have many people with vision issues that are out here on this, but just to be sure, we want to make sure that we comply with any ADAG requirements on that. So where we're across some public roads, we'll definitely have those. So one other area of concern here that I wanted to kind of talk to for a few minutes is just to the west of here is Bristol Hall Addition. This is a box culvert that's going to drain their pond out, and the lift station is right here. And if you've ever looked at that lift station, it's not a very safe situation for city staff right now. It's a very narrow driveway. It's very steep, and it's difficult to park and maneuver out of it. So we talked with Ann, and the one thing we're doing is we're going to more than double the width of the driveway there. So if you have two employees there, they can both park off the roadway where they're not sitting there one car out in the roadway. And we're also going to provide a turnaround area. So if there's a single vehicle, they'll have an ability to turn around where they're not turning on the pavement. So just trying to provide a safer environment there. And you can see again, because of the box culvert and everything going here, we ended up extending this pipe longer to get past the sidewalk, and then we brought the sidewalk up to the edge of the road here to reduce the cost of the pipes crossing the roadway there. So at Woodlawn, here we're more centered, but we're going to be matching the goal here was to match the lanes across the street was the goal with this configuration. With the road widening up to the north as it is, this eastbound traffic won't be quite as conflicted with the headlight in the eyes. The other thing that we did here, and it's not easy to see, but if you look right here on the plan sheet, and if you look at your plan set, we're actually raising the road almost 2 feet as it approaches the roadway there. So you don't have cars that are coming up with their headlights angled up in your face as they're approaching you and stopping. We're raising that up so they're leveling out. By the time they get up here, they're leveling out more level with the pavement, because that's one of the big problems with that intersection is just the angle of approach. It puts the headlights up in your eyes. So here's the sidewalk connection here, again to the shoulder. The plan on this one is with the other funding, we're going to widen this road out. We'll probably end up needing to cut through this corner here. We'll have to extend this storm sewer pipe to get it crossed over to the other side where Isley's sidewalk is at. And of course, just because it's the way it is, there's a large communications box right at the end of the sidewalk where we would like to connect. So to avoid getting into an expensive utility relocation, we're going to plan on just moving everything about 10 feet south to stay south of that utility connection there. And that'll actually line up. There's riprap and stuff on this east side of the road that will end up, that'll help us stay out of that a little bit more too, out of the drainage ditch and minimize our impact there.
Ken, will the plan be to have some sort of a walk? Because I know there's no plan to do an intersection or light. Is there any plan to put like a push button say there for crossing?
I'm going to say in the short term, our plan is to just put some crosswalk signs and stripe it. You could look at doing like an RRFB or something like that. I would say not. You wouldn't want to get into the expense of a full-blown signal there, but you could look at an RRFB or some similar thing to that. And if you don't know what an RRFB is, what it is that if you ever go out to the airport and you drive around the loop by the DoubleTree, there's a couple posts, one on each side of the road, and if you press the buttons, the yellow lights flash rapidly. That's an RRFB. And so it's just a way to draw people's attention that something's going on.
So I know there's something similar going on right now with 45th. Is there an opportunity to partner with the school district to pay for that light so that they can use that sidewalk as safe walking?
We haven't had that conversation yet, but I'm talking to Shane Schumacher on a couple different things already. He's their property management person who deals with sidewalks. I can certainly ask them about that. We've got, I'm going to talk about it on the 45th presentation. Then we have another project in Southeast Wichita that we're looking at a crossing. So we can talk to them about that. So here's just a typical marking plan. You can see the proposed striping there on the roadway. Again, the 12-foot lanes with 3-foot paved shoulders. There's no passing zones right now. There's a couple areas with limited sight distance where it's no passing, and we aren't going to be changing the grade significantly enough to change those. So the no passing zones will remain substantially as there are today. We'll plan on signs that aren't reused or reset will be salvaged back to the city of Bel Aire to determine if there's any use for them anywhere else. Construction
Can you
phasing.
back
Okay.
up on that for a second? What is that, the previous slide?
Yeah.
What's that deviation about the middle there about?
This,
Looks like, yeah, what is all that?
that's just the striping to get the cars into the, so your through traffic gets kind of lined up with the through traffic, and then the left lane traffic turns in. We could carry them straight through, but it's pretty common to have them pull out, and that kind of creates a more intentional movement into the left turn lane.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So construction phasing plan, I'll just mention here that we're still working with our construction services staff on some lessons learned from the Woodlawn project as far as phasing goes. And we'll be having them kind of walk through the plans again before we go to final to kind of talk about this. But one thing that we're considering right now is looking at potentially doing a full shutdown on the eastern 1/3 of the project. And that just lets the contractor, it gives them a lot more freedom to really go quickly on the project. There's no driveways, there's no access points in here. So it's one of those things that people could just go in and out and just go to the west. The only thing to consider there is how do we handle turnarounds there? Do we do some kind of a temporary hammerhead or something like that would be the only concern if we do that kind of a configuration, because you don't want to have somebody stuck where they can't safely turn their vehicle around. So that's really the only concern. We may just go with the alternative is what we have with phase 2 is it would be during phase 2 construction, we would just have eastbound going to the school. The idea there being carrying that traffic into school. We'd have eastbound, so people going in the morning to the schools could get there. The phase 3, and it depends on when the project happens, when it goes to construction. We're showing westbound on phase 3, where that would be the south half improvements. If it's not during the school year, it may make more sense to do that. But if it's during the school year, we may still go with eastbound on that as well. It just depends on the timing of the project as far as what makes best sense for the stakeholders that use the road.
How long do you anticipate each of these phases being? Just rough numbers. I know you can't quote it.
We talked about it a little bit, and I'm guessing this is probably, and of course, I hate to even say anything out loud. But we're expecting this to be probably around a 8 to 9 month project. So each phase would probably be 2 to 3 months is our guess. This isn't going to be as significant as the Woodlawn project in terms of that. And yeah, so it should go a lot quicker. It could be even as short as 6 months overall, but we're talking probably more like 9 months overall. Some of it depends on the time of year, and like we've been running into it the last couple of weeks, is it rains just often enough to keep the ground conditions wet. So it just depends on what your ground conditions are doing on the time, of course.
But Ken, you're thinking ideally if it's bid out in time to start construction, say it's like spring, it's one construction season.
Yeah, that
It's
would
a
be the hope, is
season
one
project,
season.
not a 2-season project.
Yeah, this project should not stretch into a second season, barring major weather concerns or those type of issues.
So there were some significant water issues at some of those developments along there. Are you anticipating any of those water issues for this road as well?
Well, we are upsizing some of the pipe systems where it's crossing the road to help carry the water more effectively across there. So we will try and alleviate some of that. As far as when you're talking about water issues, if you're talking about like one of the projects that had groundwater issues,
Right,
those kind
right.
of things, When we did soil bores on it, there wasn't any groundwater reported as an issue in the roadway. When we had GSI do some soil bores a couple years ago, and there was no groundwater issues in the road. The groundwater issues they're really concentrated about, I'm going to say, 150 to 200 feet south of 53rd. There's just kind of a band of water that runs through that property. We're doing the construction observation on Bristol Hollow right now, and the groundwater is actually significantly lower right now than it was a few years ago. Because a few years ago, if you kicked the dirt, you'd see water. And we dug a 3-foot hole the other day next to the roadway to check the soil condition, and it was dry 3 feet down. So it's high enough. The road itself, 53rd, is significantly higher than the area that was having the groundwater issues in Bristol Hollow in particular. So long story short, I'm not expecting any groundwater issues.
Well, of course, right now we're kind of in a drought situation, but that ebb and flows, right?
It does, and so it could come up, but when they dug the test holes was a couple years ago before we were in the current state of drought, and even then there wasn't any water in the holes that were of any concern. Got excited. So talking a little bit about right-of-way acquisition. In blue here, I know it doesn't show up real well. There in blue there and blue there that's the 3 right-of-way acquisitions that are on the westerly portion of the project. Ann's currently working with folks on getting those acquired. The Kilgores, I know that they asked for a color-coded map so it's easier to tell which trees were in their property and off their property, because when you're negotiating, again, the trees are usually a serious concern. So we provided an updated tract map that had that. On the east half, this drawing here actually shows this is actually the wider sidewalk that we're proposing. One of the issues we're running into on that, I'll just mention as we look at this, is there's a bunch of power poles that are just the right distance from the right of way that we can't slide in behind them. So we're going to have to go out in front of them. And so I've given this to Ann. We will probably end up straightening this out. We probably won't do that many little serpentine curves in a row. We'll probably straighten that out a little bit, and we may lengthen these out a little bit, but we wanted to give her an idea of the utility concerns out there. But on this one here, we do have a couple drainage easements where crossroad pipes cross, so that we need to get easements. And then here at the east end, there's a right-of-way acquisition to accommodate the widening of the road. And the reason why this only goes to here is as this road is rising up, the ditch is getting deeper. So that's why we needed it on that north side. There is just the road, because we're raising that grade up. We needed a little bit extra right of way in that area to accommodate the deeper ditch we're creating. Utility coordination, I just want to touch on that. We've been working with Lumen. They have a plan complete. They're ready to start relocation. All they got to do is they need 2 things. They need to turn in a permit, which I talked with Ann, and she gave the contact information in that. But also, some of the relocation is going to be into the new right-of-way, so they need the new right-of-way to be acquired before they can do the relocation. AT&T, they have a pedestal at Woodlawn that's right in the middle of our future ditch. It's going to be a significant cut, and they're asking us to provide 3-month lead for them on getting that relocated, maybe 4 months.
Tell them to start now.
Well, and I know that one of the things I needed to give them was if we have an anticipated bid date that we're going to set, that'll help that. They didn't want to start spending money, and you know how things go. A lot of plans are made and then never end up happening, so they didn't want to expend the money until they know for sure it's going on. Cox is so far the only thing they've identified is they have one resident who has a fiber optic service, and just because we all love to pick on Cox, that was funny. We sent a guy to hydro excavate it. We were doing some hydrex on some gas pipelines. It was 3 inches deep. So it's like it was a pretty quick hydrex on that part. And then again, the power poles you saw on that previous slide, we are trying to leave the power poles in place so we don't get into a bunch of expense to moving power poles and that type of thing. So we are trying to do that. And then as far as other relocations, we haven't been made aware of any. we talked about this a little bit, but the grant funding is coming up, and this is a picture of that area I was talking about. And there's that box I was talking about that's right off the end of the sidewalk. And what we're going to plan on doing is coming in through the middle here, across the end of this riprap, and bringing it across and tying it into the roadway. We will tie that in, and as I mentioned before, there'll be some impacts on storm sewer and that type of thing. So anyway, with that, I'll take any other questions you might have on the project right now.
So in that picture will the path be elevated then, so that when it rains, you're not walking and driving?
Yeah, the path will be, we will size a pipe that's big enough to carry the water through there without impounding it. But I imagine we'll probably try to drop it a foot or two in between just to minimize the fill, but it'll be, I would guess, somewhere around 3 feet above the flow line. They'll be above the flow line with the path. We won't be trying to go through the channel itself. So,
Well, Ken, my first question would be, knowing what you know, what you have left to do, when would you suggest that we plan to bid the project if it were in a perfect world?
well, in talking with the utilities, right now, I would say we'd probably be looking at, AT&T said they'd like 3 months. So that would be probably sometime in October, maybe early November, but sometime in that time frame is what they would prefer to see. We, as far as our plan changes for the sidewalk, we're anticipating we can have those done in just a few weeks. We've already started the preliminary looking at it, but we're a few weeks out, but that won't be a delay as far as that goes. But I would say it's probably, and Ann, I don't know if that's kind of what you're thinking, but probably around, at this point, it'd be sometime in October.
Does the AT&T relocate have to be done before it's bid and construction starts? Is that like in the way of everything?
Well, if we're trying to do that east half first, yes, it would be in the way. So, and I know generally it's preferred to get the other utilities moved so they don't, develop amnesia and you end up with a problem during construction where they haven't got around to it.
When would we want to start this? Would we want to bid it this fall and start like March or?
Well, and that's the one thing you could certainly do is give a long lead time, because that will give you an opportunity for better pricing. If you're giving contractors a little bit of room to plan ahead on it, that will give you better pricing. You could start some of the work before spring, as far as the earthwork and those kind of things, starting to prep ditches and that kind of thing. You could do some of that ahead of time.
So it would be better to go ahead and bid it sooner, even if we didn't want the construction. It would be better to bid it sooner, even if we didn't want the construction to start till next year.
Yeah, a little bit of a window there. There's nothing wrong with that. Would you agree with that, Ann?
Yeah, and even maybe provide flexibility of when to start between bid day and March, like give some sort of a flexible start.
Yeah, you're always better off with the contractors if you can do that, where you give them room where they can kind of work it into their schedule.
If you put a requirement on there, that has to be completed before the start of school in 2024.
And I think that's where Ann was
what-
maybe just going. Yeah. So that's the only other concern is it's always a gamble on asphalt prices as far as where those will be at too. But as far as your question about could you stipulate a completion date, and that's something that you could certainly work into the mix, would be having targeted dates for completion dates. And I know we've talked about that on 45th Street. Is part of that is we are going to try and lean away from going straight calendar days and go for more milestone dates for getting certain phases done to try and control the project a little bit better.
You mentioned they could do some dirt work first. Do we want to make that a separate phase, or, they come in, do all your dirt moving and then come tear up the road starting a certain date?
Yeah, and that could certainly be part of it, where like you could be doing excavation, getting the ditch prepped, since we are shifting the road south. Part of the first, we could end up making that more of the early phase work, would be doing that stuff that's clear of the existing roadway and start getting in culverts and those kind of things and getting that prepped. That's certainly one thing that could be done. And I know that's the one thing we would want to do is work with the contractor to kind of come up with a phasing plan that they would be willing to live by. One of the challenges whenever you're setting up a plan like this is you can think it through all you want and they're going to have a different opinion. So,
Right. So I'm in a way, I'm almost of the mindset, and maybe this, you just tell me if this is not the right thing to do in this world, but that if we wanted to say, okay, the end date must be August 15th or something, if that's what we decide it would be, and let them go from there and decide how they want to manage the project. As far as when they want to do dirt work, when they want to do whatever.
And that's certainly
them
something
phase
we
it
could
out.
talk about would be how to structure the contract as far as giving them more flexibility. And then, if they're not done by a certain date, they understand there's penalty days. So,
Okay.
I like the end date, but I also think there's a problem there. If we only specify an end date, they come in and start tearing a bunch of stuff up and then leave for a few weeks.
Yeah, one of the things that you do though when you laid out a clear phase is they're not going to be able to do the other phase till they finish the first phase. Like they're going to have to maintain traffic, so there's steps
Right.
that have to go through and finish before they can start the next phase. I think having an ending date on it is always a good thing. I think probably reaching out to the contracting community to find out, what that ending date looks, if they really think 6 to 9 months is doable, is probably more important than worrying about how they're going to get it done. Like figure out what they think's doable, set a date.
yeah. And I haven't
If
had
it's not
that.
doable, then you're running into cost increases to get it done by your school date. That
Right.
It'd be nice to have it done, but if we have traffic open eastbound, if you want to make that stipulation by August 15th, maybe that's a better way to approach it.
And those are certainly things we can look at. And I have not called the contractors yet and talked to them about working days. I haven't gotten to that point yet. So,
Okay.
So any other questions on 53rd? Well, and I'll say that the road is definitely showing its wear and tear again.
Again, still, it hasn't quit. It's just a whack-a-mole.
Well, if we get something on the schedule to rebuild it, people won't complain so much about all the holes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ann's handing around slides for this one. I went bigger on these. It wasn't quite as many pages, so I figured I'd give you 1 page per slide on this one.
Okay.
No magnifying glass.
Yeah, this
I had
one will
that
be
here
a little
on my
bit
phone.
easier to read. So this is a slide that I reused from the last discussion where, we have our different stakeholders that we've been talking to. We've been talking to some of the residents, Sunrise, UST 259, City of Wichita, and the Bel Aire staff. I'm just going to kind of walk through the project. We've presented this concept to Ann and Ty. They've given us some feedback as far as their concerns. We've included those. But there's some stuff I want to just talk through as far as what we're doing. And then at the end, there'll be some questions as far as getting some feedback from you on, what you would like to see us do on the project. I intentionally did not show the intersection at Oliver, really, where it's not part of the discussion today. So I didn't want to put any extra emphasis on that. That'll be a battle for another day once we get the traffic counts done. So I'll save you guys I'll ease your minds, and you don't need to worry about any discussions on that tonight, or any decisions, I should say. Yeah. So, but
No binding ones.
yeah. So looking at the west end of the project where we're connecting to Oliver here, I mentioned it last time, but we are proposing a frontage road here. And what that does is that will eliminate these 3 driveways that connect onto this roadway, and, potentially more driveways in the future closer to the intersection. From an access management perspective, you typically don't want to have driveways within the city of Wichita. Will tell you 400 feet, but that's a long ways, but that's what they like. And by lining it up across from Glendale, it would provide a safer environment for these users in the future. We talked when we met with this developer, he's wanting to do some kind of replatting on it. He doesn't know what he's going to do yet. So but it's planned to be replatted. So this turnaround, it's just shown there on the property line, but that would probably be moved based on his conversation. As you guys know, last week, this is a place where they do fireworks stands. So that would undoubtedly come into play in the short term as far as where they might want to have that driveway located is something that works for that too. So there is some right-of-way acquisition that is required here. This southeast corner here, the intersection, I've got the sidewalk shown along the property line. We're going to have a couple different alternatives that we're going to look at on the design of this. We're going to look at one where it's an open ditch and then one with a closed RCBC. And the closed RCBC will turn that area into kind of a park or open space area. So with bike paths and those kind of things, you know, it might be a place for somebody to take a break. You could put some, you know, features in there that welcome to Bel Aire type stuff. So when this project bids, our plan is to have an out alternate, and if the prices don't come in favorable, there'll be an opportunity to save some money by leaving it as an open ditch. So we're going to look at both alternatives on that. Again, like I mentioned, we'll talk about the intersection at a later date. I'll mention on the frontage road that the property owner at 5018 East 45th, they have previously approached the city to see about having the city install that frontage road on the part that's currently platted as frontage road. And when she saw the price, she lost interest. The advantage to doing it with the project is the city's already going to be doing some of the storm sewer improvements that were drivers in the cost of her project. So it's kind of a win-win. We can save her a little bit of money that she would have otherwise had to spend, but it was money the city's going to have to spend no matter what to do anyway.
Is that the property that has the gravel road now?
Yeah, it is. That's correct. One thing they did ask for is, and you can see the road kind of gets a little wider on each side of these connections. They wanted to be able to park on the road. And I had it drawn at 24 feet, and at 24 feet by fire code, it's supposed to be no parking. So we made it 5 feet wider to accommodate where they could park cars on one side if they wanted to. So, and they said that the folks we met with said that they would be willing to pay that extra expense in order to have a place where if they have guests or whatever, they have a place to park. And the guy here with the big bar or the bigger shed, he had like 20 friends over. I don't know if you saw by the fireworks stand, but he had a lot of friends over at the 4th of July. So he needs the parking. One thing I've got shown here is an optional median. We don't have to put the medians in, but they create an opportunity to put trees or other amenities that kind of do traffic calming, break the flow of the road. So we're showing them that now. That'll be one of the things we'll ask you to provide some feedback on. We do have right-of-way acquisition necessary here on this property here to get the sidewalk through. If we do this left turn, this decel lane into Kruger, there's just not enough room to put the sidewalk in without encroaching on that property. So it's just dead space right now, but it's a reserve that we would recommend acquiring.
Is that a 10-foot walk on that side?
Yeah, that's the 10-foot walk. And I'll say that the reason why we're doing the 10-foot walk is if you go out there right now on the current sidewalk that's out there, it's a 5-foot sidewalk, and it's about 2 feet off the property line, and it's about 1 foot off the power pole. So it's not enough room to go to a 10-foot path without getting into a bunch of pole relocations. So that's why we're recommending the 6-foot sidewalk on the south side, is that allows us to put in the walk without additional utility relocations that can delay the project and just, add to issues on it. So,
and the 10-foot's on the north side.
The 10-foot would then be on the north side, correct?
Okay.
So going east from there, we have some empty parcels here that are future development possibilities. We were told when we met with Sunrise that this can be used as a staging area during construction of the project, that they don't have any immediate plans for the property. So this empty parcel right here they've already offered that up as a staging area for construction. We did this median because of these properties. This median is limited in length. The design I did a 50-foot radius off the end of this property line there to give enough room for a vehicle. If they have a trailer, they can pull out around the end of that. We're realigning the walk a little bit closer to this roadway here to again minimize the pipe lengths of the crossroads pipes in that area. These two sidewalks that connect in down to Eagle Lake, those there we'll be looking at reviewing the grades for ADAG compliance, and so those may get a little bit longer before we get done, just trying to make it a little more comfortable. I was riding that the other day on my bike, and I had to go down many gears to feel comfortable going up the hill. So I'm looking forward to making that a little bit flatter.
It's all about you, Ken. It's all about you.
I'm
Just to let
thinking
you
of
know,
everybody
my
else.
toddler's going
Just
to be
joking.
disappointed. He loves running down the hill.
We'll put in a steeper part there. We'll put a side path that's steeper.
Hey, Ken, sorry to interrupt you, but the page before, it might have been even 2 pages now, that Westlake intersection,
Yeah.
I noticed it has a real weird, diagonal to it. And I assume it's because of the turn lanes on the
You're
it looks
talking
like the
about this-
westbound side. It's just kind of misaligned. Just is
Full
there
street.
It's an illusion.
is it?
Yeah,
It will
'cause
line up.
This white line here actually lines up with the high edge on the other side.
Gotcha.
3-lane lines up, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we could talk about, if you're concerned about that visually, we could
Wonder if
talk
we
about
should-
doing more
is there room to
concrete.
shift it so that it's more of a straight road and it's not.
Yeah. And if there's a concern about that, we
It
could
may
always
line up,
make
but
that,
it's-
we could make that decel lane concrete, and that would eliminate that appearance. You're spending money though, but it would definitely reduce that influence. But it is actually, it looks crooked, but that white line does line up with the high edge on the other side.
They may line up, but
Until you really look at it.
Yeah.
they may line up, but the road does move, right? The lanes line up, it looks like, but the road clearly shifts from the north.
Well, it's just
boundary
because you're
to the
reducing
south.
lanes. You got turn lanes there and that don't go through the intersection. They
Well, the
just
total
turn.
lanes are the same on each side of the intersection. There's a right and a left on both sides. There's one through lane,
But on
but
one
it's
side of
clearly the road.
The
is
right
shifted further
lane-
north.
The right lane doesn't go through the intersection.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, is it an optical illusion?
It
or
is.
it-
It is an optical illusion.
Okay.
It is drawn straight across through
Gotcha.
there. It's when I drew this up, I took the section line and I offset everything off
Yeah,
the
yeah.
section line directly.
Yeah.
So it looks funny because
It
of
will
that
be a straight-
transition, and you'll see that happens again further to the east.
Okay.
Again, if it's one of those things that, and I can talk with Ann about this, you could make the argument that the decel lanes, with it being decelerating traffic, it would be better with concrete anyway. So we may have to look at the cost of that to see if it makes any sense. But going to concrete on those lanes, it could end up adding $10,000 to $12,000 per lane pretty easily. So and that, with the number of lanes we have, it would add up. So
It does look like you're putting right decel lanes on all the turns.
no, we tried to pick, like, Glendale's low enough traffic, it doesn't warrant having a decel lane into it. Kruger is probably marginal, but it does serve a fairly large area to the north. Westlake definitely should have a decel lane into it. And we haven't done our traffic counts, so that'll be one thing we double check on our traffic counts, is making sure that this one is warranted when we do our traffic counts. We're gonna start our design under the assumption that it's necessary, but we will double check that. Going on to this next piece, again, this median here, the one thing that's kind of odd on this one, this exit here for Sunrise is currently outbound only. The way their parking lot is striped and the way they operate. So in theory, we don't need to have this turn bay here. We could lengthen this median out. So the one thing we're going to need to talk to them about is, do they want to maintain that ability to flip their traffic around so we don't get asked to tear that median out at a later point. Right now, we're leaning towards you're better off leaving it short just in case. And we don't want a situation where we have a brand new median and they're like, oh, hey, we're redoing our campus. Can you tear out the brand new median? So that's where we're opting on that one. When we met with Sunrise, and I think we talked about this before, but they were adamant that the signal needed to be moved to the intersection. I talked with our traffic guy who's working on the traffic, and he said that, yes, he would agree with that. What that leads to, though, is the volume of traffic here. Edgemoor is down the road. This is probably going to be an intersection that will likely reach warrants at some time if you wanted to signalize it. we wouldn't want to, I wouldn't recommend spending the right money right now. And I don't think it would even meet signal warrants during our design period. But what our plan is right now is to lay it out to work and then to just plumb it. So if you ever do want to do it, all you got to do is just drop in a controller, pop up some poles and go. So that's what we're recommending with this. The downside about that is, and again, we want to see what the traffic study shows. Traffic signals have gotten a lot more expensive in the last few years, and I don't know where the trend is in the longer term, because we used to do traffic signals for about $100,000 an intersection, and they're closer to 250 to 300,000 now. COVID was really bad on traffic signal prices.
So would you be doing like a hawk signal there?
Well, actually, this close to the intersection, you can't do a hawk. It would have to be, in the short term, we'd have to do an RRFB on that one, where it's just the little flashing lights. Or you'd have to go signalize. And we can, that's something we'll talk about.
Because right now there's a signalized crossing
Yeah.
there,
Mhm.
and it's used a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of crossings there
Yep.
at school time.
Yeah. And so, Mhm. Yeah, and
It's a
so,
red light signal.
and you could, we can talk about just putting in the single poles, but it becomes problematic where you're at an intersection, because what do these cars do if you're controlling traffic from one direction, what happens to the other traffic? And so it quickly cascades into a full signalized intersection. So the final decisions on that have not been made. We need to get the traffic study before we're really going to know what we can do with that. Sunrise has agreed. They like the idea of realigning the driveway directly across from Edgemore. They like that. So that's the one thing we're planning on that. We talked to them robustly about relocating the crosswalk down to here because, outside of the school, this would be a better spot because it goes directly into the park. But they said they already have problems with kids jaywalking, and right now it's only 75 feet away and they jaywalk. If you move it further to the west, you're just increasing the number of jaywalkers. So I think we're stuck with a situation where it makes the most sense there. The only question is what kind of signal treatment we do.
Does the median have an impact on the jaywalking, the way that you would do a median?
Give them a place to stop at the middle of the road.
People are just lazy. They're going to just take the shortest route. I don't think.
It'd be a tall median. It'd be like a curb.
You just put a wall.
Yeah.
Well, they have the bigger concrete one medians sometimes. They have the
You're talking
small
like a Jersey barrier type
concrete
things?
medians. I don't know what you would do there.
I haven't talked to Ann about doing any kind of enhanced median treatment there, but my guess is they're going to jaywalk regardless. Just if we don't put it there, and that's been the discussion. We talked with Mike Spade, our traffic guy, and he was agreeing that just human nature, people are going to do that. But we need to look at what kind of signal treatment it makes the most sense in the short term if we're going to move it there. And so that's still some work, and we need traffic counts to really be able to evaluate that more.
So the question off the Sunrise entrance is great, and I like the idea of doing a full intersection. I think it's better for the community, it's better for Sunrise. Is there going to be any cost sharing going on with that? Like, that's clearly not just a driveway, that is a road built into their property. How does that work? Like, how would cost share work on that with a private school?
We haven't discussed that at
Yeah, I was gonna say we didn't specifically talk about that. So that's something that, particularly if we get to signalization, since they're the ones insisting on moving it there, it's going to be worth the discussion. And part of it is they have some other uses for this property here proposed in the future that may be drivers to justify it. So looking here, we're going further east. This is that piece of property that Sunrise owns, and I know they've got some plans out there as far as what they're going to do. I don't know if there's anything publicly available. The one thing we looked at, though, is because of the proximity of Auburn to Edgemore, this here, trying to put any driveways in here is going to create a hazardous situation for turns into that facility. So one thing that we're going to recommend is that there's access control on this property, and that normally we wouldn't recommend having a decel lane into here, But if Sunrise does something here where they have a higher use, that decel lane will be warranted at that point. So, so that's why we have a decel lane added there at Hedgerow is kind of a consolation. If we're not going to allow them to do anything here, that we enhance that a little bit and make it a little safer for pulling into that street.
Just a little quick housekeeping. Mark is having a little hard time getting everybody on the mic. So if you please make sure your mics are on and talking into the mic, that would help a lot. Thank
Okay. One thing that we discovered now that our survey is complete is we have ourselves a pretty serious right-of-way encroachment that's going on. And I'll have a detail on the next sheet, but the walls that were built on this project for Kappelman Bel Aire Heights are out in the street right away, and significantly, like well outside of their wall easement. And I verified, I looked at the county's website to confer just to make sure that our survey was accurate. And when you look at the county's GIS, the fence lines are lining up perfectly on the lots north of there, but you get to that south brick wall and it's in the street right away. So one of the things we're going to have to make a decision on is how do you handle that? Because there's a couple different things we can do. Well, let me just jump. Well, I'll leave it. And here's another island that because of the development down here, there's no need, and the development here, there's no need for any left turn movements on either side. So this is another area where we could do a median. But as far as the wall goes, Ann said that I should provide something with a little more detail so you could see it a little bit better. So the dark blue line is where the wall is that's out in the right of way. This one here, and this one wraps up to this point on the house. The lighter gray hatched area there is our proposed walk that we were proposing if we were going to put it in there based on existing right of way conditions. And so you can see the wall encroaches on the walk. There is enough room to probably squeeze the 10-foot back path in between the wall and the future roadway, but it would require some retaining walls in order to make the grade transitions work. The south side of 45th is quite a bit lower than the north side there, and in order to get it to work, we'd probably have to do some retaining walls. But relocating that wall is going to have a significant expense too. And I talked to a builder that I know who he's built screening walls, and he said they were like $90 to $100 a foot 4 years ago. And with the way prices have gone, tearing out the wall and putting a new wall in is going to probably cost $200 a foot, is my guess. So it's probably over $100,000 to get that wall moved back to where it ought to be. So there's going to need to be a discussion of, do we do that? Who pays for it? How do we want to handle that? So
I know it might make the road a little funky, but do you have room on the south side of that road to realign the road? I thought there was a median over there. Yeah,
there is enough room. We do have the frontage road down here. So if we start moving it south, we're going to start squeezing closer to that frontage road. But that is something we could talk about doing as far as putting in a little bit of a reverse curve and realigning the road there a little south. That's something we could look at doing.
But you'll still have the same issue. There's a current sidewalk there too. I hope we would save. You're still gonna have the same issue with elevation change on that side, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and actually that sidewalk is smaller than the standard now, so we're actually proposing to replace that walk right now. But we were going to move it kind of out in the middle, and you can see there's a little bit of room even with where we have it aligned. But yeah, there. To your point, Jim, yeah, we could shift that road to the south a little bit as a part of the discussion. But it is one of those things. It is an encroachment on the city's right of way. You'll just have to. That's something we'll have to decide on is how we want to handle that.
Is there an HOA in that area? Yes.
Yeah. So, but
your area, your neighborhood.
Yeah. So, like I said, our survey is showing that. I double checked it with the county's GIS. I'm confident that wall is a problem in terms of it being an encroachment. That we'll just have to decide how we want to go ahead with that. Okay, so now the last piece here, looking at the east end, that there is a right-of-way acquisition that's going to be necessary on this parcel here where the pond is at. The good news is they put their fence far enough back that we wouldn't have to pay to relocate the fence. It's already out of the way. So that's kind of nice, but they do have a gate keypad that it's actually, if I recall correctly, it's actually in the existing right-of-way, but it would have to be relocated clear of our sidewalk or moved in some fashion. One of the things I said I would look at is this pond, and my preliminary look at the pond is that we don't have adequate freeboard to really generate enough volume to make a difference on the runoff into Trib 7. As far as going onto that property, trying to excavate that pond, the expense of doing that, changing the outfall, the gains were minimal that I was finding on my preliminary review. So I haven't finalized that, but my preliminary take on it is that we're not going to be able to get any benefit out of that. We are proposing, like I've said before, realigning the walk to reduce that cross road pipe length. One other thing to note, this property owner here on the south side of 45th east of Dundee, they also have a fence that's out in the street right away. So there'll have to be a conversation about whether or not we want to require them to move their fence to the actual property line there. Of interest, Hillcrest, for whatever reason, when it was built, it doesn't center in the right of way. So we'll have to realign that in some fashion to get it tied in. And we may carry that a little bit further north with just some regrading and get the gravel realigned a little bit better. But that doesn't drain particularly well, or it doesn't line up particularly well. We are looking at right-of-way acquisitions for these parcels as well. This facility here is Southern Star. It's a gas regulator facility. I had an initial conversation with them, and we don't want to get into, because it's on private property, we are not going to want to get into relocating that facility. It'll be too significant of an expense. So we'll need to bring the sidewalk out around that. We are recommending going ahead and getting right away on the rest of it, though. This is a proposed Arthur Heights improvement. This will be in before this project happens. That'll probably go under construction late this year, early next year. So there'll be another driveway and a pond over here when that's done. And one thing, not that it's a big deal, but we'll have to figure out restriping to accommodate this. That area will need to be restriped sometime after Woodlawn's done. We'll be redoing the striping on the brand new striping on the pavement when Arthur Heights is done. But in the short term, it probably doesn't make sense to mess with it. But we'll talk with Ann before the Woodlawn project gets finalized out to see if there's any tweaks to that striping that would make sense.
Because I don't think they've done the final striping there.
No, they haven't. They still have to do their surface lift out there. So
No, it's not done.
If we're jogging that sidewalk south to go around that gas facility, could we not do it on the other two properties and not have to do the right-of-way acquisition?
it's a possibility. We'd still have to do a little bit of a right-of-way acquisition at this corner just because the nature of you don't want to be too close to the road with your crossing if you can avoid it. So we might do a small triangle take there. But that we could look at that.
So what's the reason for the jog on the east side of the road there?
On this one or
The next jog?
this
there?
one here?
Yeah.
Just going up closer to the property line.
Okay.
That the right of way is wider there, so
Right.
reduces the chances if you have to relocate that sidewalk in the future if something else goes on.
Okay.
And I was going to back up. Correct me if I'm wrong, but on Woodlawn, they did do permanent striping on the north side of the intersection. So I think they could start doing permanent striping in the rest of the intersection. So if there is any coordination, it probably has to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, and
Striping today?
No, they did some, I think it was last week,
Yeah.
like where the cones line up through the turn lane on the north side.
Oh, yeah,
It's permanent.
yeah.
The yellow
Okay.
stripe is permanent. So all that's been surfaced. All those lifts are surfaced lift. There's no bumps. Like it's smooth transition
Right.
through the intersection now.
so the only reason why we may wait on the striping here is the lane configuration that the MKC used on this is slightly different than the lane configuration here, and there may need to be some retransitioning the striping when we get it tied in, because we're actually going to remove and replace a little bit of the curb here with the way they narrowed it up. When they did their design, they did the in the areas where they had the 3-lane, they did 11, 12, 11, I believe. And in the area where they were going to 2-lane, they did 12-foot lanes. So it just creates an awkward, it's not designed the same when they laid that out. So it's not off, it's only off by like a foot or so, but there's still, we may have to redo the striping anyway in the future, no matter what. Yeah, so there'll be a little bit of transition there that's going to have to be done. One thing I wanted to just kind of wrap back to a former conversation, I mentioned that USD 259 is interested in doing this crosswalk here. This really isn't really totally tied into 45th, but it does impact the sidewalk up on 45th potentially. I just want to let you know that we provided cost estimates to USD 259 for the RRFB and the sidewalk and everything. It was around $100,000. They haven't got back to me as far as if that's something they're interested in doing or not. They just said they were going to take it under advisement. So one thing that you may want to just decide for yourselves as far as for citizens that are wanting to cross this road is, does it make sense for the city to approach the school district and say, hey, we might be willing to pay a portion of that cost? I don't know that you want to or need to. I know money's a finite resource, but I just wanted to mention that I haven't heard anything back on that. Just a few things to think about here today. And again, I know there's no binding actions taken today, but that frontage road at the west end, for the city to participate in working with them, even if we make the property owners pay for the paving and stuff, the additional right of way it's going to take to do that, it's the additional right of way and a little bit additional dirt work and those kind of things. It probably is going to cost around $75,000 to do the frontage road for the city. It's probably a $300,000 frontage road, so it's still a significant investment by the property owners. But so that's one thing we'll have to decide on. And then the medians. Do you folks like the idea of having the medians? Is that something you like the idea of having on the road? I know some people really like them. Some people hate them.
How much?
What's that?
I can't tell if I like them until you tell me how much.
So it's money.
Yeah, and so that's the next question there is would you prefer that they be hardscaped where you only put like a tree at each end? Because that way you don't have to worry about watering the grass or taking care of the stuff, where you can make it a lower maintenance situation. I'll tell you honestly, cost wise, I think it's going to balance out either way. Now you can't do bricks. Brick medians, you're spending money really fast. But if you do a concrete median, it's going to be similar price to just paving it. It might be a little more expensive, but it's pennies on the dollar compared to the overall cost of the project.
Seems like putting trees in the middle of the street that are going to get big and have big root systems that ultimately then destroy the street are counterproductive.
Well, I would say our landscape architect would pick out ornamental trees that wouldn't do that to you. Our goal would be to pick trees that would not have, widespread shallow root systems that would heave the pavement. We would seek to avoid that. But
Just my personal view on medians, if they're in places where there's really not going to need to be a traffic lane, I think they're fine, but I do not like concrete medians. If you're going to do them, put some low maintenance, low water type.
And we could
brush
do
in there
native plantings, native plantings
Yeah,
too.
that
Something
kind of
that
thing.
you don't have to mow, once
So-
every 3 months or something like that.
Yeah, do some things like that. And I'm fine with ornamental trees if that makes sense. That's all good. I don't like the concrete ones. I think they got them down there on Woodlawn, and I think it just looks tacky. It just
Well,
and then they have wrecks there on then they tore up the median because of the wrecks down there
Yeah.
near K96.
so
Can I almost add the opposite question? If we didn't do for aesthetic purposes, it's just the benefit is you're just dividing traffic where they're not right next to each other, or
yeah, and there is a safety benefit to medians where less likely to have a head-on interaction. I mean, obviously you have a curb you can rub up against that's a little closer, but it reduces the chances of head-on interactions if you have medians. And it's traffic calming because by narrowing the road down, your perception of how big the road is changes, and you're less likely to speed. In those areas that I'm talking about in the middle where there's no driveways, people will probably speed up and drive through there a little bit faster because it's a nice big wide open roadway with no cross traffic, and so it's a traffic calming element that's to it. But to your point, they can be unattractive if they're not done well. And so this part of the discussion would be: does the city want to invest the money in putting some landscaping in there? And we could certainly look at trying to find something that's lower maintenance.
Well, I had a citizen actually ask me about changing the landscaping along Woodlawn. They said, come up with a proposal, and they haven't done it yet. So
Yeah.
I'm at least open to it because, as you've talked about before, it really is kind of another gateway to the city there, right there at 45th and Oliver. So
Yeah.
depending on pricing.
Yeah. And done well. And we could even put trees at each end and a couple in the middle and do some kind of stamped concrete along the edge and a narrower band of some kind of native grass plantings in the middle. That would be, again, something you'd only have to mow once every few months. It wouldn't be a weekly mowing thing, because I know I don't want to see a situation where we're asking our city staff to be in the middle of the road mowing every week.
Well, I want to put plants out there that don't require any maintenance and that shade against weeds, because that's still maintenance. We'd have to get in there and treat weeds or pull them or something. So
Yeah, fair.
I don't know what you can do, but even if we have to mulch them once a year, that's still maintenance.
Mhm.
And that's low maintenance, but you hear where I'm going, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So what we'll probably do on that then is I'll talk to our landscape architect, maybe come back with some ideas and give that to Ann and Ty to vet, and then we'll let you look at that again before we make a final decision on that part. The medians themselves don't affect the rest of the design of the project, so it won't have any impact on our grading design or anything necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody. I don't think we want something that's going to cost the city a lot to maintain, but I do like the idea aesthetically and safety wise of having some breaks in the road and it not being just one big concrete asphalt jungle. I'd rather have it feel a little more homey, not just wide open and paved.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of advantages to that for a community like ours that people are living here because they're not wanting to be in the big city. It kind of breaks it up, makes it feel more like we're out in the suburbs.
Okay, good.
Certainly don't want to do it at a huge expense or a huge maintenance concern either.
And then also the preparing edge more. Do you like the idea of going ahead and having that prepped to where if the signal warrants are met, it'll be easy to upgrade that intersection? And the feedback I got is that we need some more clarity as far as making sure that we're creating a safe crossing environment for the students. That's probably the biggest feedback there.
One thing that we talked about, I think, on Woodlawn with the medians was the impact on emergency vehicles for the medians, because if you don't have a median, you kind of get extra space on the road for
Well, the fire
weeding
department actually said absolutely not. You
in
couldn't
and
put them in there.
around. So I think that's something to think about.
Right.
Gotcha.
On Woodlawn, they said absolutely not. There was just not enough room if it's a median to get around traffic.
Okay.
And,
Well,
and if you have that, I didn't really think about that, but if you have that same situation here in Oliver, you're probably not going to be able to do them there either. But I don't know that.
And so like here, you've got this extra lane. So, I mean, hypothetically, you could put a very short median without having any encroachment. But as you go to that one there, that's a pretty long stretch that the question there would become is and of course, we already talked about cost being a driving factor. Would you want to widen the road out to allow the median? And my guess is going to be no on that. But as far as the medians, would you say you're kind of leaning away from those then, or do you still want us to give you some feedback on that and maybe talk to the fire department and get some feedback from the fire department as well?
I'd get the feedback from the fire department first, because if they're saying absolutely not, then there's no sense in us to even having a discussion about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ken, does it feel like you could, just looking at the roadway, where there's turn lanes and where there's extra lanes would be an appropriate place to put some shorter medians, just to kind of break it up, not have those bigger long ones, but having a few at sort of approaching intersections, or is that not even possible?
My guess is really this one here is
Okay.
going to be the only good opportunity.
Right.
The rest of them, it won't work. So we'll have that conversation with the fire department. The Edgemore signals, again, it sounds like the biggest concern there is just making sure that whatever crossing we're doing, we're making sure that it's a good long-term solution on that.
Your only cost to do that is to lay some conduit, right?
In the signal boxes, but it's not significant. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's far cheaper than trying to bore them under at a later point.
Yeah. What kind of signal box would we have to put in? Is it a concrete bunker type thing or what?
No, they're just basically little mini manholes.
Would
Okay.
you put in the footings for the poles and leave them there with bolts, or would you just wait to do
No,
that?
you really don't want to do that. You don't want those bolts sticking up.
Could be on a concrete pedestal.
Yeah.
When you've roughed them in the past, have you done that or not?
Typically, we don't. We just go ahead and prep the boxes because that's the underground. That's more difficult to do at a later date. We typically don't put the pole bases in, but.
Right.
And then those walls that I talked about will sound Jim's idea of maybe looking at shifting the roadway south a little bit if that allows us to do that. We can talk about that a little bit as far as if that's the better solution there. But Would you-
Save tearing them out and putting them back in?
yeah, well, and that where it gets into is you get into that difficult conversation where if you go to the HOA and say, hey, you built it in the wrong place, it's your bill. That's certainly a good way to generate some negative ill will. And if it's something that we don't need to do, maybe that is the right solution, is to shift it south a little bit.
Well, I do think it's appropriate for us to have a conversation with them about that
Yeah.
encroachment. I'm not saying let's go and force them to tear it out, because let's look at options there. But they certainly need to know that encroachment exists and that there's potentially some liability on their part.
Yeah, and I'll say that like when we've worked on arterial projects for the city of Wichita, an encroachment like that, they have what they call a minor street privilege. And what that does is it's a formal document they sign acknowledging that they're encroaching on the street right away, and they have to actually carry insurance with the city that covers if somebody was to hit that obstacle that's in the right of way, that they're covered, that their insurance pays for it, not the city's. So because it's in the street right away, whose fault is it if it's in the street right away? So that may be something that has to be part of the conversation. Is we'll let you leave it, but you have to provide us documentation that you're protected. So,
I agree, Jim. Like, I think they need to, Mayor, I think they need to know that they're out of their right of way. They're on our property, and that we're evaluating options. And some of the options might cost us more money, but it might save them. It's like there's probably going to be a partnership created there if it costs us more money, but it could save them money.
Right.
So I think they need to know so that doesn't catch them way off guard as we're evaluating options.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If the wall that's there, it's a perfectly good wall, can be maintained and not destroyed. Like, absolutely, we wouldn't want to do that. But
there's increased cost to moving it south potentially. So
Yeah, I don't see any real advantage to removing the wall unless we just find it engineering wise it's not feasible.
yeah, and there's enough room we can transition that to where, and then to Mr. Dean's point earlier, we can really get the road curving around.
oh right, get the curves out of the road.
And then the last thing is just
And the zip
it's not really totally involved in this discussion, but considering that crossing there, is that something that the city wants to promote or not? The school district brought it up to us originally when we talked about 45th, with the notion that they save $60,000 a year for every bus they don't have to run. So for them, if they've got even one bus in 2 years, they've paid for their road crossing. So it's just a matter of, for them, it's determining it. But I just wanted to bring that up since that was part of the previous discussion. I just wanted to bring that up as just something to be aware of.
Will you remind me of, you mentioned before, I think some reconfiguration that's going to go on at Stuckey where crossing through that neighborhood is going to make sense for kids. Did you say that at some point that Stuckey's going to be doing some construction?
Yeah, so part of that would be when you're looking at it, they'll have to do a sidewalk across there is what I was talking about is that, and then, does that impact future development on that property there? But that would be the part I was talking about before, would be constructing that walk. And that's part of the $90-some thousand that I had told them that they would have to budget for the project.
I guess my general feeling on that is we improved Woodlawn. They didn't help us pay for the sidewalk there. We put in the Isley sidewalk. It didn't help cost share there. This is going to save them money busing. I think they should cover the cost. That's just my opinion on it. But, and also the other one on 53rd that we brought up earlier, where it crosses 53rd to Isley, that could warrant potentially a signal too.
Yeah.
So a crossing signal that would benefit them, I assume, because of busing.
Yeah.
So
Well, potentially, yeah, if they've got any kids in those neighborhoods over there.
Well,
So
surely, and maybe they don't yet, but would. I'm sure they will.
it
They're all
wouldn't be that
mostly
surprising.
duplexes in there, right?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be surprising. So,
I mean, so we've put in quite a few enhancements already or improvements to our community, and it's great. That is already benefiting them that they haven't cost shared on. So I kind of feel like this is an opportunity for them to step up to the plate and maybe pay for that one if it's going to benefit them that much, or at least tell us what they're thinking.
okay. One thing I did want to mention that is kind of funny. I don't know if the grades will work out, but they at Sunrise, they'd planted bushes that spell out Sunrise. It actually falls in between our sidewalk and the road. So I don't know how you feel about letting them leave that there, but the grading may still end up dictating that it needs to be removed. But I did find that was kind of funny that it fell in where potentially it could stay.
Is that another one of those insurance issues?
I don't know if running into bushes is going to hurt too bad. But
Did they feel strongly about keeping the Sunrise bushes?
They were fine. They knew when they put them out there that they were putting them in harm's way. So,
I'm okay with them keeping them if they have an agreement to maintain them.
okay, interesting. Okay, well,
Back to, I don't want our staff
No.
taking care of stuff like that we don't need to.
yeah. Well, and I will say that back in the day, there was an LED sign that they had to put in, and they were not allowed to put it where they wanted to. And we're at a point now where it's nice that sign isn't a conflict. So that decision, when it was made, was the right decision to say, sorry, I know it's way off the road, but that's only for now. So whoever had the foresight I remember the discussion, but I don't remember who was the leader on the no, make them put it back there off the street, out of the street right away. But it was the right choice. So.
My other thought too is, as you talk to Sunrise, mentioning the intersection improvement, essentially a driveway, a new street into their property, is what their preference is, whether it's a full light warranted or not, or a signalized crossing. And if there's some discussion with cost share there, if they're leaning towards preferring it to be a full light, that's more expense, but maybe we can share that burden.
Yeah, and it's certainly a conversation worth having.
Yeah.
So
As well.
I'm fine with the provisioning of the traffic signals, though. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see what when we get the traffic study done after the roadway opens back up here in the not too distant future. One thing I do want to finish up by saying is we're going to take what you said tonight. I'll talk with Ann and Ty. We're going to get started on designing the plans based on some of the feedback here. We'll come back with you on a couple things like the medians and that type of thing. All of this will get revisited and confirmed when we do public meetings for the intersection improvements in the fall. We'll be well into our design, but if we receive specific feedback that drives the discussion on something else, we will keep an open mind, and we'll make sure that the public does get their opportunity before these projects get done. If there's any other areas that need to be thought about for what we're doing here, though, the intersection design is probably going to be the part that's going to be the most interest for folks. Will be what we do at that intersection.
Well, National Night Out's next month. Are you ready?
Sure.
Ignoring the intersection, do you have
Get your
any
survey out.
cost estimate?
What's that?
Ignoring the intersection on Oliver, do you have any rough cost estimate?
No, I haven't done an updated cost estimate on it at this time.
And then
so.
do you think we should do 53rd before 45th or vice versa?
Your timeline, if we can get the funding for 53rd to do it next year, you want to do 53rd first, get it done. And that's going to help on your rerouting of traffic too and carrying traffic around. So if you can get 53rd done first, I would absolutely recommend that.
How long do you think 45th will take the project? Roughly.
It won't drag out as long as Woodlawn did because it doesn't have some of the complications that Woodlawn did. Woodlawn had large storm sewer the full length of the project. It had a railroad. It had other things that complicated it. So it won't be as long as that, but
It's 2 seasons.
I would plan on 2 seasons though. Yeah, I don't think you could expect that one to be done in a year.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
How are we going to finance it?
Ken's got a credit card.
I'll tell you what, I'll pay my taxes every single year.
This road sponsored by Garver.
There we go. I like that.
Chris will like that one, won't he?
No, he won't.
But it's normally when we don't get the bid right, we're sponsoring on accident.
There you go. Well, obviously there'll be some funding discussions that come up as we go and get more pricing on it. It'll be, of course, with Integra and everything. Hopefully, we see that go, and we see a lot of positive changes keep going on. So, anyway, I appreciate your time. Any other questions?
I guess not. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So is Ted here to tell us anything about his thoughts on funding? I know he's here.
Yeah, that's up to you. We're at 2 hours, but you were here 3
I can
hours
make it pretty
yesterday.
quick.
So he's got some numbers and to tell you how to fund these if you want to hear it.
I mean, and we kind of touched on it in January. It's
Yep.
everything in this city is dictated by land debt, and the best part of it is it ends in 2034. The other ace that we have, is we touched on a little bit last night, is did you turn us off? Yeah. So here's our total debt with the land debt, and you see in 2034, that's when it comes off. Say we did, I guess we'll talk a little bit about temporary note financing. You pretty much have a 3-year window that it's in temporary status, and then you permanently bond it. We can bond it straight out. I'm just trying to tell you what we've traditionally done. So that gives us, we start construction now. A temporary note is pretty low interest rate. During construction, we were able to estimate numbers, and then once we get the final construction costs, we'll go out to bond it. We can bond anytime in that 3-year stretch. Just a little footnote. The real big thing is what happens if we start construction at 2.5 million for 53rd Street this year, maybe 45th. These are estimates we were given. It might be a little more than 2.5 million, our share, if it's a one WAMPO project. And then we know Rock Road, who knows, throw 5 million at that, might be a KDOT / WAMPO project. So I just wanted to throw some debt service numbers at you guys. What would happen to our debt? Total debt service if we did all 3 of these projects, 2023, 24, 25. It was a little concerning when we talked. I was here when we were talking Woodlawn. We were negotiating new realtors in Central Park because we did about 14 houses in Central Park when we were deciding Woodlawn. That's a scary time. This isn't quite as scary because we've sold all the land, and we have some reserves there to help us out through 2024. And that's kind of where we would deploy those reserves to pick up the debt service payment above the line we're currently paying at. So what you're essentially doing is using the reserves to pay down debt service on our land debt. That drops our entire debt structure down to where it is today. So what you're doing is using your reserves to pay for the debt service up until 2034. And then the whole game's changed, because if you look, even with those 3 projects continuing to pay that bond, our debt's still goes way down. Now there's going to be other projects in the next 10 years. However, that just seems the more logical approach that we go about doing this. If we wanted to me anyway, that's my approach, because as you know, what we heard earlier today, what we know that's going to happen with development, we're going to need maximum flexibility in all of our budgets. And I think this strategy would give us maximum flexibility. Right now, we're getting about 5% interest on our $5 million. Now it's at $5.8 million. A 20-year bond, if we bonded today, is 3.8% for the city. So it helps us that the interest rates are higher right now. We're doing really well with that land sale money. However, this just seems to me the more logical approach to deploy those reserves, what they're meant to be, to smooth over our debt until we get to 2034. So that would be kind of my 2 cents, and we can talk about it. I didn't touch on it last night, but our capital improvement program, we started this year with about 4.9 million. There is about $800,000 that we ended 2023 with over what we projected. So I'm going to infuse that. That money's pretty much already been spent on our preservation program that we've already approved. We've done $1 million last year, $1 million this year, and preserving our pavements. Other little things, as you know, we're going to have the trans system study pop up on us. That's $90,000. That's where we'll probably take it out of this fund. So to me, I really want to preserve our capital improvement program for a lot of the other priorities we identified at the beginning of late last year, at the beginning of this year. What are we going to do with our facilities? What are we going to do with some of our parks? HVAC in here, I know we're yet to get started on it, but you believe me, it's a difficult project because there's so many different units in this building and how you want to design it. We're starting on it, but it's a difficult one to do. We budgeted $150,000 for that. It might be $200,000. We just don't know. We're really going through those phases right now. So that's why the approach of deploying some of our reserves to pay for some of these bigger ticket items would be more beneficial than trying to throw all our remaining capital improvement reserve of $1 million in cash on this project. In 2024, just looking at the projects coming up, Central Park Pool, we still don't know what we're going to do. Skyview, the developer Skyview is really interested in building a nice park over there. We said $160,000, and that covers pretty much playground. But as we get into it, who knows what else is going to come up if we want to connect some sidewalks or do whatever we need to. So I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we're going to need every bit of our capital improvement reserve in the next 2 to 3 years to address a lot of these needs that we either facility, parks, rec center had a really good turnout on their proposed plan. So I'm just trying to look ahead the 5 years and what we're going to need. And that would be my solution to this problem. Now, you guys have the power of the purse, but that would be my presentation tonight on what we would do.
So if we spend like this chart that you just brought back up, will we have any of the $5 million left at the end of that?
Of course, yeah. So I can do the numbers, but right now we started at 5 million. We're at 5.8 with the interest rates they are. $2.5 million on a 20-year bond. Let me do a quick calculation here. About $187,000 a year in debt service. So that's what would cost us, $180,000 in debt service for 53rd Street and then 45th. So times that by 2. So those two projects would be $375,000 a year times how many years left. And we don't even know if 45th is going to be built in 2024. So really that's a short time frame before we get to 2034.
But if we keep that money invested at 5%, the interest will pay those payments, right? We don't even have to dip into the principal.
Well, I mean,
You're the principal.
right now in 2 years, our principal will be secure, but we're talking the next 10 years. So yeah, I mean, eventually you're going to eventually you'll dip into the principal of what we have, but that's kind of what's,
That's what I missed too, Ted. You threw out 3.8%. That's our financing rate expected.
Yep.
You're saying.
Yep.
And the reason you give up a 5% return is because that's a short term and 3.8 is a 20-year. So you're reducing risk by locking in that 3.8 for 20 years versus.
so
five.
so the good thing about general obligation bonds is you never lock in for 20 years. You always can refinance. So right now is kind of a little on the high side of the geo bond that we've seen. I mean, our land debt's at 175 right now. So that's part of my job. If I see an advantageous refinancing opportunity, I take it and I just present
That's
it.
the question I'm asking. Why would you take 5% off the table to fund a 1.5 or 2%? Why would you
But
take the 5% that you're earning?
No,
off the
we're
table?
earning 5%. Yeah.
Right. Why would you
yeah.
take that off the table so you could save 2 or 3%?
So that we don't raise taxes is the biggest reason.
So we're
And-
buying
and
so
we're not
we're
gonna
buying
use
time
all
to
of
get to 2034.
Yeah.
Because right now we're fully funding our land debt with
But you already got a
property
2
tax.
to 3% gain in your interest rates.
So your other option would be to pay cash for it and reduce all our principal, and we wouldn't collect 5 on that. So that there's 2 options we have.
Okay.
Because we have to make the payment on the debt that we have.
Let's make the payment. Of
So the money to
2
make
or
the payment.
3%, but you're earning 5% on that money that you're going to trade in to make that payment. Right? Isn't that what you're saying?
No, so
No.
No.
Yeah, kind of. I see where he's going, but, and so yes, we would spend part of the money we have invested at 5%,
Right.
but not all of it.
Right.
And we would, like I said a minute ago, I think the interest, for at least for a few years, covers the payments.
Right.
So we wouldn't even have to touch the principal. You're shaking your head no.
no, yeah, I mean, yes,
Oh,
we
okay.
wouldn't. No, we wouldn't
I
have to
thought
touch
I
the
had
principal.
it wrong there.
But the other side of the coin
And
is
the other thing is the land debt we're going to keep because that's the cheapest debt we have right now.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
Yeah.
but the
Why not?
roads
Why would
would
you
come
pay off
in
that
at
cheap debt?
3% or so,
You
the
have to
new
make the
loans.
minimum payment.
Yeah,
We'd
you have
make
to.
the minimum payment, right?
Ted, also, can you clarify how much we want to borrow? There's a cap. There's that line, or your suggestion in the past has been, we don't want to borrow past a certain line or amount.
Yeah,
Like,
because of your bond rating. That's why I wondered if there's a lot more that
So-
behind that.
more to the
So
decision than
this
just straight up, let's borrow money.
this
right?
strategy is you can describe it very easily to an S&P auditor. When you have that type of reserve sitting there, they're not going to penalize you. And they also can see forward and see our land debt dropping off as well. They really evaluate us pretty high. So I would not be
You're comfortable because of the size of the reserve that we have.
size of reserves we have. That's the only thing keeping us right now is we keep a higher than anticipated reserves and our development's blowing up. That's why our rating rated. We got a more favorable rating because that other piece of we're blowing up as a city. They said we can't hold you out of A-. We have to go AA.
So do we bond the whole amount or is it like a home mortgage where you have to pay some percentage down?
You can if you want. There's no percentage down on
Okay.
on geo bonds. You would bond the whole thing.
Okay.
So I
Just
think
asking.
that's a good plan. I like what you're doing there.
Yeah, I mean it's the most straightforward we can do. And you stretch your dollars.
Exactly.
Got to leverage it.
We need to capitalize on as many grants as we need to.
Oh, yeah.
Keep that
We
money.
keep capital in grants. And the thing is on the 45th Street, Lampo still hasn't funded that. Okay, so it is still next in line, but it has not been
Really, that
funded.
number up there is probably best case. We're probably going to spend, depending on where the budget comes in, if Lampo funds it, and if.
Right. It is next in line, but it's
The
not there.
biggest lesson we learned from Woodlawn is the engineering estimates need to be spot on.
Oh, yes.
And then we need to act as soon as it's, because if you stall any bit, that estimate's going to fall
Well, the
a year
biggest,
deep. And
the thing that hurt us badly
Killed
was it
us.
was a year from the last estimate till
Yeah.
the actual contract letting.
Right.
And that was a year of high
Killed-
inflation, and it
killed us.
cost us $1 million.
Right.
If we go through WAMPO on 45th, we'll still have to go through all the KDOT stuff and the.
Oh, yes. KDOT takes
So it'll be
management
a
of those
much more
projects.
expensive project than 2
Yep.
million. It's just that will be our share.
That's our share.
Right.
Yes.
It'll be the 80-20 grant, Matt. or
Yeah,
the
it's an
typical-
80-20.
I knew 53rd was going to get WAMPO funding. I thought 45th was not.
It's the other way
Other way
around.
Oh, the other way around. Okay.
It's the other way around.
53rd's getting funding for the sidewalk though, right?
Yeah.
That was the.
Yeah,
So
there is,
that's part of the cost,
just to prove that, yes. It hasn't gone to the tip yet, but it's already passed the hurdle.
On 45th.
Putting the,
On 53rd.
53rd.
The sidewalk. Just the
The sidewalk.
sidewalk.
just the sidewalk. But that's through
But
the
every little bit
CRP
helps.
funding. It's not the same funding that we're looking at for 45th Street.
Different grant.
There's so many different funding rules there. I don't even know, I haven't got my head around it. Have you got your head around all that, Ann? All the different rules they have? There's so many different streams of funding for WAMPO. It's
That
just
one's
boggles the
specific for
mind.
the bike connectivity.
Right.
grant
It's
or whatever.
specific. Well, it was carbon reduction was what they approved it under, carbon reduction. So, because bicycles don't produce carbon apparently. So,
Just the little bit that comes off the tires.
Right.
When Greg peels rubber.
Well, thanks, Ted, for presenting this because this is important.
That's very helpful to know, yes.
I think that's a great strategy.
very good. All right. Anything else we need to discuss? If not, I'll call it an evening and we will see everybody at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, right? Okay.